If you never went to high school in America, you might have no idea why a weird-looking stick can make so many students scream.
Who wants the spirit stick?
You're also probably confused about pep rallies, big yellow school buses, and confusing backpack rules. I grew up thinking this was just normal school stuff. You know, that's just school. Then I moved to Europe and realized, well, some of this looks quite strange from the outside. My name is Edinger, and I spent the first 22 years of my life in New Jersey, going to both suburban schools and to rural ones. And today I'm breaking down what surprises my European friends the most about American schools, what films may have exaggerated a bit about them, and a few things I think that they left out completely, which would surprise most Europeans watching. So if you want to understand more about this weird stick, first you've got to have a better understanding of pep rallies. By far, the element about American schools that I get asked about the most by Brits is pep rallies. TV shows and films make them out to be some big amount of fanfare with students dressing up, live music, cheerleaders, mascots, and more. From my experience, yeah, it's actually quite accurate. We'd have about 2 to 3 pep rallies per year, the first of which being for homecoming, which does come up next in the video. We'd be told about the upcoming pep rallies well in advance so that we could prepare, you know, because we were encouraged to wear our school colors to school that day, celebrating some school pride. Mine were at one point black and gold at one school, and at the other school it was orange and blue. The best part was that pep rally days were half days, so your classes were much shorter and your final period ended 2 hours earlier than usual. So you spent the final 2 hours of your school day in the auditorium or all-purpose room with your entire school, celebrating whatever sports team had a big game on soon. At both of my schools, the marching band would be playing, the cheerleaders would be performing their numbers, and the football or basketball team would run out to applause, maybe throwing a ball around or something, while the mascot would do some sort of dance. It was all quite over the top. It was always very, very loud as well. Think stomping your feet, and there's instruments and cheers everywhere. And you weren't just wearing your school colors. A lot of people also put on face paint. In fact, they were heavily encouraged to. Well, if they wanted the fabled spirit stick at least. In many schools across the country, high school pep rallies were such a big event that they'd show up on the local news. And a lot of times, the week leading up to the pep rally would include different themed days. Wednesday, that's pajama day. Everybody wears pajamas to school. Thursday might be sports apparel day, where, you know, everyone's wearing a jersey or something. Friday would be class color day, though. Every class, as in freshman class, sophomore class, junior class, senior class, etc., they'd be assigned a different color to wear. Freshmen in black, sophomores in orange, juniors in blue, seniors in white. If you want to know why Americans use the word sophomore so much, by the way, I have made a video about that. I will link above. And at some point during the pep rally, the band would come out in front of everybody and they begin to perform the school's alma mater, its song, which we were all expected to stand and sing for. And because this was America, it wasn't enough just to sing a song about our school. No. It also had to be a competition. The high school class that could sing the alma mater the loudest and most enthusiastically won the coveted Spirit Stick.
Winners of the Spirit Stick!
As determined by a panel of judges sitting in the middle of the auditorium. So you got the class of 08 wearing white in one corner, the class of 09 wearing orange in another, and so on. In some parts of the US, because of course it is America, you can't just refer to it as the Spirit Stick. No. That's nowhere near enough capitalism. You have to use the stick's full name, which of course includes the name of a local bank or credit union.
Final week of the TTCU Federal Credit Union Spirit Stick, and what better place to give it away than Glenpool High? It is the home of the Warriors. How we doing, everybody?
Our high school's been sponsored by the bank. Hooray! Oh God, can't wait to grab my NordVPN Spirit Stick. Whoa. Wait a minute. Evan, your high school had an official song? Yes, I just want to point out, not every high school has some sort of anthem that they have to sing for a Spirit Stick. Some might just be based on the overall school spirit, based on the amount of face paint and school pride on display. If you want to know our song, I found it, all right? Our song went like this. Woodstown High School sons and daughters laud her to the sky. She's the pride of fair New Jersey. Hail to Woodstown High. Insane. Oh, what? It's so strange. I will say, that is strange. I feel like I don't know many Americans that also had a high school song that they had to sing. Please, if you're an American, make me feel not weird. Obviously, this sort of thing does come off incredibly extra to non-Americans. British people in particular shrivel up with discomfort when they walk into a retail shop and the employee has the audacity to ask if they can help them. The horror. So the idea of showing this much outward display of pride in something as trivial as the high school that you go to is mostly seen as bizarre over here. I personally don't see anything wrong with getting the students to be a little excited about their school. As someone who experienced it across a couple different schools, I always found it quite fun. fun, and it broke up the usual monotony of the normal school day in a fun way. What's not to like? Also, thanks for subscribing, by the way, but if the pep rally was for a homecoming, well, there's usually even more involved. Homecoming was always in autumn and was meant to be the big game where our school would play against its biggest rival in American football. Alumni, or previous students from the school, would come home to see this one local game, hence homecoming. At this time, the homecoming king and queen are announced, which, yes, is probably incredibly strange to most Europeans watching. During Spirit Week, students get to vote on who should be homecoming king and queen, which, yes, is pretty much just a popularity contest. And the winners get announced at the pep rally and get given a sash and a crown to wear, and sometimes even get to hold a scepter. They get to bring all these to the upcoming homecoming dance, which is sort of like a prom, but scheduled in autumn, usually the Saturday right after the game. At the suburban school I went to, we had quite a big American football team, but there were also about 1,100 students from grades 9 to 12, as opposed to the under 600 at the more rural school. The suburban school would have a little homecoming parade, but it was just kept within the football stadium during the halftime show for the actual homecoming game. This suburb was like most in America in that it's really not walkable, and the idea of shutting down traffic on 1 or 2 roads so that some school kids could have a parade probably would not fly. But when it comes to the rural school, oh boy, we had a full parade where the marching band, the color guard, sports teams, lots of clubs and groups from the school, they'd all get their own float and parade around the actual main street of the town. The homecoming king and queen, they get to sit in a car waving at passersby with their little like crowns and such, like royalty. There was a huge amount of fanfare, a huge amount of community involvement with locals and such sitting on the sidelines and watching. In many American towns, especially in the Deep South, these parades and high school sports in general can become a huge event. And I know some Europeans might find that odd, but to me, there's something wholesome about the fact that even when they're just kids, these students can get the feeling like their whole community is celebrating them. That's nice, right? And that's probably a big reason why these pep rallies and such show up on the local news in some towns. There was even a news channel branded Spirit Stick I saw in one video. For the most part, it was just a bit of harmless fun and school pride, but definitely not as weird as another topic later in this video. A big thing I get asked by Brits all the time is, did you really go to school in a big yellow school bus? Yeah, this is pretty much the only period in 99% of Americans' lives where they have a functional public transit system. And it works quite efficiently. At both school districts I went to, the school day would be staggered for elementary, middle, and high school students, so the buses came at the right time. So you'd stand out on the side of the road in front of your house about 5 minutes before the bus was meant to pick you up. And then you get on and he takes you to your school. The school bus would drop you off for middle school, which is usually grades 7 to 8 or so, at 7:05 a.m. Then the bus drivers do their second round, picking up the high school students and taking them to high school. And they're dropped off at 7:45 a.m. And then finally, he'd do a further 2 rounds for the elementary school students and kindergartners. But if you had concert band, for instance, like I did in 4th to 6th grade, you'd actually be on an even earlier bus. They'd pick up all the band kids at around 6 in the morning across the entire district and take them to one school to practice for an hour before we'd be put on another school bus to take us to our actual elementary school. What was nice about it was that there were some students you could make friends with that didn't even go to your school, and you'd be like, oh my god, I only see him during band and he's cool. But having a bus to pick you up to go to school this early is insane to most Europeans. School in the UK in particular doesn't start before 8:30 a.m. most of the time, but then again, they also have school for the majority of the summer, which is such a shame. Can't imagine that. Back to the actual school bus, you might be wondering why they're yellow in the first place. What's that about? Turns out this dates back to 1939, when a conference led by Dr. Frank Sear, the so-called father of the yellow school bus, standardized school transportation across the entirety of the USA. The specific shade of yellow chosen was chosen because it's highly visible in the morning light and contrasted well with black lettering. The color even has a very specific name now, National School Bus Glossy Yellow. Because of course it does. This does seem to be a really nice pattern if you look at it. Like, the US does place a huge emphasis on design and uniform design across the entire country, or at least they used to do that a lot more in the 20th century. In the UK, depending on their area, kids will either walk, ride a bike, get taken to school by their parents, or they just take the local public transport. Some rural parts of the UK do have specific charter buses for taking kids to school, but there's no nationwide system or uniform design as iconic as America's big yellow school bus. These UK school buses usually are just regular coaches or minibuses that have been contracted by the local authority, sometimes with the name of the coach company still on the side. For those British students taking public transport to school, well, the local buses have a more frequent timetable around the time that school starts and ends to accommodate for the influx in students. And because public transportation is just a normal part of life over here, well, that means that having students get themselves to school this way goes a long way to building their independence, unlike in America where at 16 or 17 sometimes, some students can actually drive to school. How did they even learn to drive that early in the first place? Well, I'm glad you asked. One of the classes that Brits seem to be mind-boggled over that we kind of take for granted in America is driver's ed. Not every state offers driver's ed to its students during high school, but New Jersey does. Gotta get on that turnpike at some age. Might as well get them young. If you want to learn to drive in the UK, you have to do that on your own time, with your own money, or rather your parents' money, and probably in your parents' car. But in the US, because the automotive lobby essentially got the government to gut American cities and replace all of the functional public transport networks with roads for cars, it means Americans don't really have any other way of getting around outside of their automobiles. So yeah, it makes sense that you'd want to have a driver's ed course in school. You might as well get the kids to learn early, so at least they can drive and get around. And this might freak out some Europeans, but the class that driver's ed replaced for me at my school was health. So rather than learning about the human body, useless, I got to learn how to drive. That does explain a lot, doesn't it? I genuinely found driver's ed to be quite effective. It was only a semester long, so half the school year, and you had to do a lot of practical stuff, learning about how far you're supposed to park from a fire hydrant, and you had to test your reaction time to things, but I found it quite useful. Yeah, it's one of those things that it might seem normal to us in the US, but definitely not normal when it comes to everywhere else in the world. It does still blow my mind that we can have courses in driver's ed and advanced calculus and such, but most schools still don't have a course on something way more useful, like best money practices, investing, understanding tax. Why? That actually feels like something that a kid should be prepared for, right? When it comes to certain clubs, I'd say we actually have it very, very good in America. If you went to an American school, you might not fully appreciate just how good the drama club is. I know from experience from friends that I've had in the UK that when you're doing a play or a musical in the drama club here, you do not have a tenth of the budget or the fanfare. Everyone just kind of does their best with what they have, but it's very low budget, awful costumes, the sets are not really sets. And most of the time, they don't even have a proper theater stage. Whereas in both American high schools that I went to, honestly, I was quite surprised at just how much effort people go through to make the shows spectacular. We had stagehands, people designing the sets in their spare times. Sometimes they'd be rotating. We had a pit orchestra. That is something I really came to appreciate and I thought was normal, but it turns out having that sheer level of dedication to live plays and musicals is really quite nice. And it isn't just the students that are dedicated to this, but it really requires a lot of teachers who are passionate about this. And America does have a lot of those.
We take these shows very seriously here at East High.
Big up, teachers. And this level of enthusiasm also carries through to other clubs like marching band, yearbook, and, well, that class that got to give the morning announcements live on every TV in every classroom every week. Some of these things can be quite regional, where some schools, due to property taxes, have a lot more budget for clubs, computers, and smartboards, while other areas, they're just scraping by with a bare minimum, so it does depend on where in the country you are. Those aren't the only regional differences though. One thing I always found weird watching Disney films about school was that the students were always eating lunch outside. As a kid, I thought that was probably just some sort of movie magic to make it sound nicer, but it turns out no, it's just California. There are actually quite a few states where students can not only eat lunch outside, but also can leave the school grounds to get lunch sometimes. States like California, Arizona, and Florida, I know, allow their students to eat outside. Makes sense, quite warm states. At my schools, you were only allowed to eat within the cafeteria at a very specific time that you were scheduled. If you tried to even have food anytime after that, oh boy, I got a detention for that once. But I know in the UK, a popular part of school life is once you get to sixth form, or similar to the final year in high school in the US, some students would be allowed to leave school during lunch to buy food. This was a privilege though, sometimes just reserved for the prefects, the goody two-shoes in the school. I know that some US schools, I've seen one in Illinois, allow like the upperclassmen to leave the school grounds for lunch, so some similarities there. But do UK students not allowed to leave? They can just grab food from their tuck shop, just a little shop to buy food in the school. One question I see asked a lot is, why do American school kids on TV carry their books in between classes by hand, yet they also have a backpack that they carry to and from school? Why not just use the backpack? This again does depend on your area. At my suburban high school, we were not allowed to carry a backpack around with us. We could enter and exit the school with a backpack, but mostly to go to our lockers to store the books that we didn't need, as well as the book bag. It was explicitly against the code of conduct for the school to carry a backpack with you. You'd only take the next 3 classes' books and notebooks with you until you got a chance to visit your locker to switch them out. That's why we use lockers a lot. Why weren't we allowed to carry backpacks in school in the hallways? Well, I never really questioned it at the time, but looking back, it was likely due to safety concerns around concealed items. Some schools had rules like this in response to fears around school shootings, which is quite valid for the US at least. On that topic, at my schools, we did have some stay put drills, which were essentially school shooter drills, and we did have to leave twice for called in bomb threats. And if you didn't know, no. That is not normal anywhere else in the world, in a school especially. Back on backpacks, at my rural school, I was incredibly surprised my first day to see everyone walking around in the hallways with their backpacks. And not just that, they were like customized LL Bean backpacks with their initials monogrammed on the back. It was really weird. And it did take some time to get used to, but it just meant that rather than only carrying like my 3 classes supplies in my hands, I'd be carrying them on my back, meaning that no one could slap the books out of my hands, which yes, is very much a thing in the schools that I went to. Well, at least the first one. You, Roy. When it comes to the Pledge of Allegiance, I have made an entire video about that. I will link that above. But this one is for the Americans, my audience. If you're an American and you think it's completely normal for students under the age of 18 to recite a Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag each and every day at school, I want you to think about that opinion that you have. And I want you to think about why you have that opinion. And I want you to consider if you think maybe you have that opinion because, well, you've done that. That was your childhood, so nothing wrong with that, right? Maybe you just haven't given much thought to it. Or if you do think about it, maybe you just believe that it's right for children to recite a Pledge of Allegiance to a country before having any full understanding of what that means or what that might entail. And if you would prefer that students actually have this mindset of being incredibly pro the country they live in, rather than having a bit more critical thinking ability. Maybe not everything is perfect all the time. I would personally argue that one who truly loves their country the most would be willing to point out its flaws so that one could work with others and improve the country together. If one always believes that the country that they lived in is the greatest country of all time, well then the country would soon descend into decline, which makes a bit of sense as no one's willing to point out what's actually going wrong because, there's nothing wrong. It's the best country in the world. And I don't know, it just feels like that way makes things middle out until the whole country's circling the drain. A lot of Europeans I've spoken to do find the fact that Americans make their students recite the Pledge of Allegiance a thing. They find that really dystopian and weird, and I do agree. But as an added fun fact, if you didn't know, before 1942, students weren't required to place their hands on their heart to do the pledge each and every morning, but instead perform the Bellamy salute, which looked like that. So the more you know. I just don't think students really should be doing that type of thing personally, right? This is one of those opinions that I never had when I lived in the US because I didn't think about it. I didn't really care that much. I was like, oh, whatever, it's just part of life. Leaving the US, I was like, actually, no, that is actually very strange. I would feel very uncomfortable, regardless of what country I lived in, if the schools were trying to brainwash a sense of false patriotism into my child. I'd be like, no, I'll do that, thank you. Out of all the videos that I've made through the years about my British versus American topics, the one thing about American school that always blows Brits' minds is the idea of extra credit. I actually think that from experience, extra credit is a really good system. It acts as a second chance. If you did really poorly on a certain quiz or test in the class or in general, many teachers will allow for extra credit, allowing the student to do some supplementary exercise or learn something more to boost their grade, to show that, they're making an effort, they're trying to learn. In 9th grade, I had a US history teacher who gave us 40 points of extra credit if we stood in front of the class and recited from memory the Emma Lazarus poem on the front of the Statue of Liberty. I did that. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. So 40 points across everything in the entire class. I got myself higher than a 100% average that marking period. He also allowed 60 points if you memorize the entire Gettysburg Address from Abraham Lincoln. Those in particular I felt like were a bit over the top. A lot of different classes would have an extra credit question or two on pop quizzes or tests at the very bottom of the test. These would be worth 5, 10 points sometimes, depending on how difficult they were. For math, for instance, you could get this extra credit question that the teacher purposefully designed to be really difficult, just to make sure that you fully understood not just what she was teaching, but the reasons behind it. So if you actually took the time to spend more time learning, you get extra credit points, which is really nice. Throughout the test or pop quiz, you might have made some silly mistakes, lost some points, but using the extra credit to show that you actually understood the core of it, well, you get points, right? I had a history teacher that always provided an extra credit question based on the news. So he'd encourage his students to not just be studying history in the past, but what's happening all around us. And so if you stayed up to date on the news, you'd have to answer a question like, what just happened last week in the 9/11 post-summit something. It is kind of interesting that the main memories of extra credit I have are from US history courses, which on its own, the fact that we have 2 entire years dedicated just to US history, yeah, Europeans also find that very strange. Sure, you learn about your local city, your local country, your local region a little bit more, but the US takes that to an extreme degree and is like, you're in high school. There's nothing else really. Just learn US history and then learn US history again. And that's it. I didn't have to learn any world history after the age of 12. Silly. And they wonder why Americans can't find countries on a map. From my experience, it always felt like my teachers in America just really wanted to help us learn the material. Some of the American high school experiences I've talked about in this video might be seen as a bit weird from those on the outside, but overall, I'd argue that in terms of education, I got a very high quality education that I'm very thankful for. The American education system seems to imbue this feeling in students like, you're special, you can do anything. There's a strong sense of individualism and self-belief that does come with all of this. From friends I've spoken to in England, it's oftentimes very much the opposite. You must conform. You must wear a uniform like everyone else. You must not stand out. It's called tall poppy syndrome. The idea that if you rise too high or act too confident, you'll be cut down to size. You must never admit being special in any way. You must always talk down your accomplishments. Otherwise, you're quite rude. Honestly speaking, I feel like growing up in a culture that fills itself full of self-pride and moving to a country that is full of more modesty really allowed me to thrive more than if I had stayed in the US in general. So while both systems do have their flaws, I am genuinely grateful for the one that made me believe I could make something of myself, even if it did make me sing for a stick.
Yep, I'm back in America. Currently, I'm at Fort Mercer, where the Battle of Red Bank took place in the Revolutionary War. But the thing is, it shouldn't be a battle to keep your online data private. That's right, today's video is sponsored by mkii. Each and every day, your online data is packaged up, traded, and sold by these shady little data brokers who like to use your private data as a way to target you with ads, or worse. mkii is a service that reaches out to all of these data brokers on your behalf and gets them to delete all of your private data. Since signing up to mkii, they've already removed my data from this many different data brokers. Look at that big number. It's so big, the line just keeps going up, because every day in the background while I sit around or travel to America to different places, mkii is sending out these letters to all these data brokers telling them to get rid of my data. Anecdotally, with your private data on fewer of these websites traded by fewer of these data brokers, you should be receiving a lot fewer spam calls and a lot fewer spam emails. Sure, you could reach out to each of these data brokers on your own, but that would take a huge amount of time. mkii solves this problem for everybody. So if you'd like to sign up to mkii to take your data privacy more seriously, sign up today at mkii.com/Edinger, and you can get a lovely discount on that little link, so click it below. Anyway, thanks mkii for sponsoring. Let me head back to London town. London's that way.
There are quite a few topics I did have to cut from this video because it was a bit long. At some point, there might be a part 2. So if you have anything that you'd like me to talk about, please leave a comment below and we'll see. But like I said, if you ever wanted to know why Americans use the word sophomore, junior, senior, anything like that, I have made a great video on that you could watch above. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you back on my YouTube channel next Sunday. Goodbye.